Hello everybody, what's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, your host here at Crimes Untold, and today we're going to be talking about another vintage true crime case. We're going to be talking about the murder of Betty June and Mary Emma. So who killed them? This is quite a controversial case. So we have the murders of Betty June Binnicker, who was 11, and we have Mary Emma Thames, who's 7, of which a young boy named George Stinney Jr. was executed at the age of 14 for his crimes. But did he do it? If he did, then his sentence wouldn't have been vacated due to an unfair trial. So let's just kind of get into the murder, shall we? So the bodies of Betty June Binnicker and Mary Emma Thames were found in a ditch on the segregated African-American side of Alcolu, South Carolina, on March 23rd, 1944. They were found after they had failed to return home on March 22nd, so just a day, like the night prior, after they were last seen riding their bikes while they were looking for flowers called maypops. So maypops is passion flowers, and Amy, or hopefully I'm saying her name right, so Amy, George's sister, was the last one that saw them alive. So the odd part about this case for me is the fact that George Stinney Jr. actually helped in the search for these girls after they were reported missing. And the fact that the police are using odd names of arresting George Junius after arresting George Stinney Jr. Like, I don't know what it is about. It's like they're not using the correct names for this boy when they first arrest him. It's strange. So when the girls' bodies were examined, they saw that both of them suffered from severe blunt force trauma that ended up causing penetrative marks like to the girls' skulls, and it's believed that these were inflicted by a blunt object. There was no evidence of assault on Emma, but there was bruising on her genitals, just slight bruising. There was no sign of penetration that was determined by the medical examiner. So George Jr. and his brother John ended up being arrested for suspicion of murder, but John would eventually be released. George, on the other hand, wasn't allowed to even see his parents until his trial. So from the time he was arrested, basically until his trial, he wasn't allowed to see his parents, he wasn't allowed to talk to them, nothing. So apparently George told H.S. Newman that he had a piece of iron that was about 15 inches long and he had hidden near his bike in a ditch. That is why George Stinney was arrested. George just basically, in my opinion, was a scapegoat for these crimes, while this was an extremely segregated time in the South. So let's kind of talk about this trial a little bit. Just a little bit. Just sad. Then we'll talk about his execution, because that is the worst part about this. So his trial started on April 24th of 1944, and he would have a court-appointed counsel, Charles Plowden. So Plowden was super insufficient in his desire of wanting to help and defend George Stinney Jr. He refused to refute the testimony of the 3 police officers that testified about George confessing to the murders. There also was many different versions of what happened with the different confessions. One officer said it was self-defense. Another one spoke about the possibility that George attacked them. And another one said that he tried to help one of them and then ended up killing them. None of it makes sense. All of it is hogwash and it's bizarre. So I also want you to know that there is no written confession by George Stinney Jr. So in the courtroom, there was approximately 1,000 whites in this courtroom. And of course, there's no blacks allowed in this courtroom, which is really sad. Like I previously mentioned, this is segregation, and a lot of the unwritten rules and laws in the South at the time really were prevalent with this case. So you have to kind of understand that there's a lot against George Stinney Jr. because he is black and these girls are white. It reminds me a little bit of Emmett Till, which I've also covered on this case. If you want to watch that, I'll put it in the card above. So no matter what anyone could or would say in the defense of George Stinney, he was found guilty within no time. I'm talking less than 10 minutes after closing arguments and the jury went to have their deliberation, he was found guilty in less than 10 minutes. There's also no transcript available for his trial, which typically speaking, if there is a trial, there is a transcript. So I wonder what happened with this transcript. There's also no appeal filed. And the NAACP appealed for clemency due to his age. And they appealed to Olin D. Johnson, who was their governor. Johnson did go and visit George just 2 days prior to his execution, and he would respond to the clemency with how George admitted to the crimes and basically stated that the clemency wouldn't happen, which this also is not documented as to actually having happened, which I just believe that this governor basically, it was guilt by, you're a little black boy, you killed these white girls. You're in my down. No, I don't want you here. Bye. That's how I feel about this. That's how I feel a lot about these crimes again, like in a segregated South or just segregated everywhere. Not just blaming it on it happening in the South, it happened everywhere. There's no need for any of this whatsoever. So on June 16th, 1944 at 7:30 a.m., George was prepped for his execution in the electric chair. If this couldn't get any worse, this is what makes this worse. I was literally crying while reading about this. So due to how small he was, he needed to use a Bible as a booster seat to be able to fit into this. When an officer asked him if he wanted to say any last words, he just shook his head. He would break out into tears when the executioner placed the strap from the chair over his mouth and then placed the mask over his face. And the mask didn't fit either. It was too big. They don't have child size execution masks for an electric chair. So to make things even more detrimental and worse, when the electricity was applied, the mask fell off of his face and you could see the tears running down his face. You just see it. This was seen by everyone watching. Everyone. So after he was deemed dead, he was buried in an unmarked grave in Crowley. So in 2014, after a bunch of people researched with some new evidence that was presented to exonerate him, it was heard that George Stinney Jr. was made to confess to this crime. And he was innocent. So, thankfully speaking, that same year, on December 16th of 2014, his conviction was vacated. So, what that means is that he is no longer guilty. His guilt with this crime is gone. It's stricken from any record. So, due to his age in the crimes, laws in South Carolina have changed. So it changed so that no one aged 14 can be charged, tried, or convicted or executed within 80 days. So the murder, arrest, conviction, and death all happened within 80 days. Like legit, all happened within 80 days. It's terrifying. So the girls were last seen on March 23rd. He was executed on June 16th. So more good has come from, with wrongfully convicted cases. As of January of 2022, there's actually a fund called the George Stinney Fund, and this stems from the George Stinney bill, and in which South Carolina must pay families a total of $10 million when a case is overturned after someone is wrongfully convicted. So thankfully, something positive has come from such a negative case. That, my friends, is the heinous execution, wrongful conviction of George Stinney Jr. I hope you guys learned something from this, and I'll see you guys in my next video.